After showing off his latest body transformation on social media, Conor McGregor compared himself to Arnold Schwarzenegger and Bruce Lee. Is this argument correct? And if so, how does he compare to the two icons, Schwarzenegger and Bruce Lee? What do we know about Conor McGregor's next fight? And does Dustin Poirier's Conor McGregor status fuel him now? Stay tuned for more information on the subject. To begin with, Conor McGregor compares himself to Arnold Schwarzenegger. The 34-year-old, who hasn't fought in the UFC in over 16 months, shared the image on social media with the caption on Facebook, "If Schwarzenegger and Bruce Lee had a mad Irish baby." The image showed the former world champion tensing on a bike as he teased a return to the octagon. It was also shared on Twitter and Instagram before being removed. McGregor's most recent fight was in July 2021, when he lost in the first round to Dustin Poirier after breaking his tibia. He's teased a comeback several times and appears to be fully recovered from his injury, regularly sharing training videos in which he uses his leg with full force. He also has an ongoing feud with Hasbulla, a social media sensation who recently signed with the UFC, but a genuine fight between the two is unlikely. It's unclear who he might face, but he's been linked to fights with Jorge Masvidal, Charles Oliveira, and his old rival Khabib Nurmagomedov. He appears to be planning to fight again in 2023, but a date has yet to be set. Moving on, does Conor McGregor's status fuel Dustin Poirier now? Dustin Poirier recently defeated former Bellator lightweight champion Michael Chandler by third-round submission after a grueling 12-minute fight at UFC 281. The victory keeps Poirier, a former interim champion, in the 115-pound title picture, despite losing to Khabib Nurmagomedov in September 2019 and Charles Oliveira in December 2021. Chael Sonnen has a thought about Poirier at this point in his career. He no longer wants to be a UFC champion. Here's how he explains it. Right now, Dustin Poirier's primary goal is not to reclaim his championship. He wishes to be classified. It's the very best of the best. It's a category so high that you don't even set a goal to do when you start training. There's one more category above champion, and that's when the outcome of your fight is irrelevant. The crowd will be sold out the next time you come out, and you'll be in the main event. Even if you just lost, your next fight will be the main event. I'm referring to Conor McGregor's status. It's an intriguing thought, especially given Poirier's recent victories over McGregor. So what are our thoughts? Is Sonnen on the right track? Following that, Coach Javier Mendez says Islam Makhachev got UFC pound-for-pound ranking quickly. Javier Mendez believes Islam Makhachev is the best fighter in the world, but he believes his student has yet to prove it. The American Kickboxing Academy coach is baffled as to how Makhachev, 23-1 MMA, 12-1 UFC, rose to number 2 on the UFC's official pound-for-pound list following his submission win over Charles Oliveira in the main event of UFC 280 last month. Yes, Makhachev is now champion, but he has yet to defend his title, and there are worthy challengers awaiting him. That's why Mendez believes the UFC rushed into giving their lightweight champion such a high pound-for-pound ranking. Makhachev has only lost one fight in his professional career and is currently on an 11-fight winning streak. Despite having plenty of work in the octagon, he still has several top contenders to face. Makhachev will face UFC featherweight champion Alexander Volkanovski in a champion versus champion super fight in the main event of UFC 284 on February 11th in Perth, Australia. In addition, rising contender Beneil Dariush is eagerly awaiting his shot at the title. Mendez believes that just those two names could propel Makhachev to the top of the pound-for-pound rankings. Next up, Shayman Moraes felt he was fighting for his job versus Marlon Moraes. "I thought maybe PFL kicked me out." Shayman Moraes went into the 2022 PFL championships under a lot of pressure. Sure, he wasn't fighting for a belt or the $1 million prize that comes with winning a season, but with Shayman, 15-6, facing former UFC title challenger Marlon Moraes on short notice and coming off a loss, he felt his spot on the PFL roster was on the line. "I know if I lost, I thought maybe PFL would kick me out, and I don't want to lose my job," Shayman told reporters after the fight via MMA Succa. With only 2 weeks' notice, it was going to be difficult. Nobody, and you can ask anyone in the division, wanted to face Marlon Moraes with a full camp and only 2 weeks to prepare. Shayman had previously lost to Marlon 23-11-1 at WSOF 22 in 2015. Shayman was submitted in the third round by his fellow Brazilian using a rear naked choke. Shayman appeared to be struggling in their rematch. He was trailing on the scoreboards heading into the final round, but he was able to mount a comeback and score a TKO. "I knew I was losing the fight, but I just kept calm, and I knew I only needed to connect a couple of hands to win," Shayman explained. "So I controlled myself, my mental state. After the second round, I told my coaches, 'Don't worry, I'm going to finish this guy right now. I'm going to knock this guy out right now, as you'll see.' And so I did. Following that, Sean O'Malley wanted to bet high on Chris Gutierrez. O'Malley pointed out a recent bantamweight fight that he would have wagered money had he been able to do so during a recent appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience. O'Malley stated, "I am not permitted to bet on fights now. Placing your bets on yourself? It's just so strange. I looked at Chris Gutierrez and then at Frankie, and my first thought was that Chris was most likely going to knock Frankie out. I would have bet on it had I known." Chris Gutierrez has recently dominated in the bantamweight division, much like Sean O'Malley. Since his UFC debut in November 2018 against Raoni Barcelos, he has won 4 in a row and hasn't tasted defeat since then. At UFC 281, Gutierrez knocked out Frankie Edgar in the first round, ultimately leading to Edgar's retirement from a mixed martial arts competition. Following the victory, he moved up to position number 13 in the most recent rankings for that division. Even though O'Malley could have made a lot of money off of Gutierrez, the recent suspension renders the gamble a what-if for the UFC star. Moving on, Tim Kennedy had an HIV scare. Some fighters lead relatively everyday lives when they're not punching people in the face. But then there's Tim Kennedy. Aside from his wild stories in and out of the military, and the documentary following the story of Adolf Hitler, he also has some more naughty stories that show the glamorous side of being a prize fighter. Kennedy revealed details about hooking up and having orgies with numerous women, including an unnamed ring card girl in an episode of the 38 Challenge podcast. As amusing as this may appear, the tone quickly changed when he revealed that this resulted in him having to be tested for HIV regularly. "I got a couple of women pregnant and had an orgy after a fight. One of the ring girls tested positive for HIV, so she tracked down all her former partners. I was one of many. She walks into the gym and says, 'Hey, I'm HIV positive, and you should get tested,'" Kennedy explained. "It's not like you're either positive or negative. We're going to take some white blood cell counts over the next few months to see if you're losing your immunity," he said. So that's This is a wild story from Tim Kennedy, who probably has more crazy stories than boring ones. A moment like this will undoubtedly cause someone to reconsider their life choices. Finally, Nickel. Wrestling won't be enough. During Nickel's appearance at the post-fight press conference that followed DWCS 56 in September, he discussed the evolution of his skill set that will be required in the upcoming months and years. After reiterating his faith in his grappling abilities, the native of Colorado noted that his strong wrestling base wouldn't be sufficient to forge the success he's targeting inside the cage if it's the only thing he relies on to do so. Nickel asserted that he would always have a stronger wrestling foundation than his opponents, regardless of who they were. But that's not going to be enough to be a UFC champion and the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, which is my goal. So I've got to continue to sharpen my wrestling and sharpen all the other skills that I need to get there. And I'm extremely confident that I will when the time is right," he said. But that's not going to be enough to be a UFC champion and the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Bo Nickel's official debut with the UFC has yet to be scheduled, and fans will have to wait a little longer to see him show off his wrestling or mixed martial arts versatility. This is because his fight with Jamie Pickett, scheduled to take place at UFC 282, had to be postponed. However, when Nickel enters the octagon again, you shouldn't be surprised if he demonstrates much more than his recognized wrestling skills. Well, that marks the end of our video for today. We hope you enjoyed it. On your way out, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.